and all the other guests and members who are with us here today. I'm very sorry to announce that we lost two of our very senior members this month. Professor Bala passed away on the 8th of January at the age of 78. She was with the Poetry Society for the last few decades. She was also a past president. She had served as a professor and head of Department of English at the Osmania University. She was known for her contribution to the study of British, Canadian, and Commonwealth literature. She was instrumental in guiding the society. And she was very active in the society. She guided us. She was very knowledgeable in the rules and the regulations, and was always very helpful. We also lost Dr. B.V. Subbarao, who was a retired deputy director of the DMRL. He passed away on the 16th of this month. He was also a member for the last few decades. He had a very scientific bent of mind, but he was very interested in poetry. He was a poet himself. He had addressed our meetings several times, and he was also very active during these, when we had these virtual meetings. Many of our members have really not taken to the virtual meeting, the Zoom kind of thing, but Dr. Subbarao was always very regular. So in memory of Professor Bala Kodanraman and Dr. B.V. Subbarao, can we just maintain a minute's silence in respect of their memory? Okay, with that, I request Dr. Ismat Mehdi to please introduce Priya to us today. Ismat?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I'm going to mute myself.
Yes, go ahead.
Nikhil, can you please, may I request everyone to please mute yourselves?
Okay. It's a pleasure for me to introduce Priya Sarukkai Chabria, award-winning poet, translator, and writer of 9 books of poetry, fiction, non-fiction, and translation. She has edited 2 poetry anthologies. I was introduced to her by my young friend Sita Reddy, granddaughter of Osmania University Vice Chancellor, Dr. D.S. Reddy. And I hope we can induce her to join our society. Sita, please join us when you can. When Sita suggested Priya could do a program for us, I asked her to give me details of her writings, and what followed is a most impressive account. Priya's books include Andal, the autobiography of a goddess, Calling Over Water, poems, Clone, fiction, and Bombay, Mumbai, immersion, non-fiction. Priya was born in Madras and educated in Bombay. In St. Xavier's College, she took psychology and sociology with a postgraduate diploma in mass communication. She continues to be an appreciator of world cinema. Her other interests are Indian miniature paintings And that is why she used to come to Hyderabad, I think, to meet Jagdish Mittal. Medieval Japanese literature, vast repertoire, and painting, and world wisdom traditions. These are her interests. She has studied the Sanskrit rasa theory of aesthetics and ancient Tamil Sangam poetics. A self-taught writer, she has published 4 books of poetry, speculative science, from fiction novels and short stories, a book of non-fiction in collaboration with British photographer Christopher Taylor on Bombay or Mumbai. And she translates sacred verses from classical Tamil. Importantly, she is the founding editor of the online journal Poetry at Sangam, now in its 9th year, which is regarded as the finest of its kind from the subcontinent. Priya's writing is known for its experimental approach, poetic quality, and radical aesthetics. She has received several awards. The Muse Translation Award, Kitab Experimental Fiction Award, Best Reads by Feminist Press Awards, and was recognized for her outstanding contribution to literature by the Government of India. Her poems have been translated into French, German, Hindi. Today, her topic is Sing of Life, a revisioning of Rabindranath Tagore's profound meditations on life, nature, grace, and brokenness in the Gitanjali, which won him the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913. Even today, every Indian child learns where the mind is without fear. And we are inspired by Tagore's lyrical plea for freedom of thought and being. In Sing of Life, Priya Chabria explores the ways in which Gitanjali remains relevant to the 21st century and gains impetus in the midst of a pandemic. It is a reimagining of Tagore and his work for a new generation of readers, which she laces with her daring, poetic imagination. Tagore's nearness excites us all. For me, the special significance is his bond with Hyderabad. So moved was he by the spray and sprinkling of rocks of Banjara and the blend of buildings with nature that he composed a poem called Kohinoor. It was on my father-in-law's house, which we now call Banjara Bhavan. Unfortunately, it is no longer there. Now here is Tagore's own translation of the poem Kohinoor. From the distance thou didst appear, barricaded in rocky aloofness. Timidly, I crossed this rugged path to find here all of a sudden an open invitation in the sky and friends embrace in the air. In an unknown land, the voice that seemed ever known revealed to me a shelter of loving intimacy. This is the poem, Kohinoor. In Sing of Life, revisioning Tagore's Gitanjali,
Hello?
Chabria
33, 45, 20.
the ways in which Gitanjali remains relevant.
जी हाँ, thank you.
चैनल नंबर है ना
हाँ
735 देखिए मैडम
अच्छी बात है ओके थैंक यू
in the 21st century and gains impetus in the midst of a pandemic. Over to Priya Chabria.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Ismat Mehendi, for one of the leading lights of the Hyderabad Poetry Society. Thank you so very much. And it's a great pleasure to be here because your society, your Poetry Society, has had a long and varied history, as you were telling us. And I think you should do one session dedicated to your poetry society, its growth, how it's changed, because that would be fascinating. There are not many places that have, not many societies that have such a long legacy of devoting itself to poetry. I also want to thank Nikhil Nayak, who has been absolutely marvelous with the visuals and generally marvelous about everything. Thank you so much, Nikhil. And my friend, Sita Reddy, a new friend who we met last month at the Sangam Writers Residency. It's been a great pleasure for me to meet and get to know the scholar and writer and know that we go down the same paths of literature. And today I have asked Sita to please help us with some readings, which is very kindly agreed to. Right? So now I begin to speak on Tagore. The first thing that struck me about the poem that Ismatji just read about the Kohinoor in Hyderabad is, I think you find this constant thread in Tagore, which is the unknown, the invitation, which is also becomes the friend, the voice of a known person. And this marvelous bridging of the unknown to the known, this marvelous openness that you find in this poem, I think is typical of many of Tagore's works. Now, I must confess, I am not a Tagore scholar, nor do I read the Bengali. So my work on the Gitanjali has been from his translations of the Bangla to English. We know that, and I will say this before I begin, that when I began reading this book and translating it, the author was Rabindranath Tagore. And by the time I ended it, he became for me Gurudev, teacher with godlike knowledge. This was the name that Mahatma Gandhi gave him. And as you know, it was Rabindranath Tagore who gave the name of the Mahatma, who added the Mahatma to Gandhiji's name. So these great meetings of minds happened, and also these very, I think, accurate namings, shall we say, by which we know them. So we know that Tagore wrote Gitanjali in the Bengali, and he pulled it together from various collections, as a lot of us poets tend to do. He published the Gitanjali in Bengali in 1910. And then, now he's in his 50s, and he decides that maybe his poems need a broader audience, his marvelous prose poems. So he decides to journey to London, where he has a lot of friends, and he takes his poems along with him. And on this sea voyage, what he does is he starts translating the Bengali Gitanjali into the English Gitanjali, and he arrives in his friend William Rothenstein's house. Now, he was a photographer, and he was, shall we say, he was a public intellectual, and he knew who had to be known in London. So he had this informal little salon in his house where all the poets, all the people who needed to be there were there. And Tagore first read out his translations. And apparently at the end of the evening, there was pin drop silence because people were so awed by this generous truth and spirituality and love for nature that was coming through in his poems. And later on, as we know, the great poet W.B. Yeats was very impressed too, took these poems, spent, I think, about 27 days working on Tagore's translation, And he also wrote an important introduction to the Gitanjali. And this was published in London in 1912. Now, this book was met with, again, a great celebration that here we have an Indian voice that is, so supreme. But let's also remember the historical moment here. It is a time when there are lots of blacks and whites. India was either seen as this native colonized country, but it was also the place of mystical wisdom, the native spirituality. And that is what all these people were really moving into. And they found Tagore has beautifully voiced this in the Gitanjali. So in 1912 in London, it's out. And in 1913, Tagore wins the Nobel Prize for Literature for Gitanjali, Song Offerings. I think this is one of the most remarkable quick movements that happen in literature, from one year being published, next year winning the Nobel Prize. I know of no one else who has done it, actually. But before I go on to more of reading Tagore, I just want to read you one section from his next collection. It's called The Garden. And it says something beautiful to me. This is from his last poem, and it prefigures in a way my urge to remake his words 100 years later. He writes, "Who are you, reader, reading my poems 100 years hence? I cannot send you one single flower from this wealth of spring, one single streak of gold from yonder clouds. Open your doors and look abroad. From your blossoming garden, gather fragrant memories of vanished flowers of 100 years before. In the joy of your heart, may you feel the living joy that sang one spring morning, sending its glad voice across 100 years." And I mean, this is to me, I'm in love with the Gitanjali, but this is to me so moving about Tagore. He's prescient. You'll find time and again he's prescient. He's prescient about nature. He's prescient about fundamentalism. He's prescient about a reader coming in many, many years later and, as it were, remaking or re-listening. This I found wise, actually, just wise. What do we know about Tagore? A lot and not much. We know he was a shy child. We know he came from a very privileged background. We know that he traveled a lot with his father when he was young. And this community, this family was one of the largest, most important families in Calcutta at that time, in Bengal at that time, part of the what is called the Bengal Renaissance, ferment of spiritual and creative ideas coming forth. And this young child was listening all the time. And when he traveled with his father, again, he was listening to different kinds of music, to folk songs, to Sufi songs, to baul songs, to, of course, classical Hindustani music, and he picks it all up. He has a syncretic imagination, and this runs through, I think, not just in his art, but his life as well. But in his art, what we find is he's constantly trying to renew traditional forms, Indian, that is, or subcontinental at that time, subcontinental art forms, and he is engaging with Western aesthetic practices as well. You find this meeting happening, along with his reverence for all of life, for all of nature, because everything calls to him. The dusk calls to him, the river calls to him, the butterflies, the stars, the villages and their bylanes, everything is alive for Tagore. It is vivid. And when I read Tagore, I'm often reminded of the jewel-like tones in Deccani miniature paintings, these bright, magical colors, how everything seems to be more alive, more fragrant, as it were. And this is what you get in Tagore, this immense fragrance of life, which comes through. We know he possesses an esemplastic imagination, which means that it is, on the one hand, intuitive, and on the other hand, it is unitive. It sees a whole in the many, the one behind the many. This is one of, I think, Tagore, the Tagorino of the Gitanjali's qualities. And there is a tremendous freedom from fear. When you read it, though there's darkness, I found this freedom from fear, which we know he talks about later, is already there. And what does this do? I mean, this wonder at the cosmos, this wonder at nature, his moral reasoning, what does it do to the reader, was what I was asking myself. And I said, it makes me very grateful to be alive, to be able to read Tagore, to read the Gitanjali. And it kind of lifts one's heart up. Now, we'll come to how it works in the pandemic a little later, but I just wanted to talk about some of the emotions that you find in the Gitanjali. Now, they range from despair to joy, abnegation, their hymns of glory, their celebration, and it is a very shaded book. Subtly there, but sometimes dark and deep, and we can come to why. And he writes this in various places in his various houses, but he also, interestingly, I think this makes for the dreamlike quality of the Gitanjali. He also writes it when he is in his luxurious family houseboat, floating down the river Ganga, the river Padma, sorry, and visiting his ancestral territories, you know, looking after them. He's being landlord, and apparently he was very kind to people there. But every day he is seeing this landscape, this almost idyllic, pastoral, calming landscape unfurl before his eyes. And I think this quality of calmness and this quality of beatitude actually seeps into his work. But then he also writes the Gitanjali at a time of deep personal crises. He's writing the Gitanjali when he's lost 4 members of his family. They're either dead or they are seriously ill. His father, his wife, very young wife, his son, and his favorite daughter, Renuka, who he called Rani. And Renuka was ailing. So what he does is he hears that mountain air is good for her. And of course, the Tagores have a villa above Ranikhet, high above in the forest. And it's interestingly called Tapur Tapur, pardon my Bengali pronunciation, which means droplets of water, rain. So you can imagine this man sitting there in the dark with his ailing daughter, hearing the rain in these misty, gloomy evenings, and writing his poetry. So what I'll do is I'll give you the first poem of my translation from the Gitanjali, which gives you his bountiful side. It is the first one. And this is not my translation, but my revisioning of it. And here it is. Endless pleasure gives birth to utterance. Gifts come to these small hands of mine. Ages pass and still you pour. Still there is room to fill. The vessel empties and empties again and fills this flute of a reed, breathes melodies and pours. This kind of, wave after wave of gratitude which is coming through, which runs through. And now for a dark, dark, dark one, which he wrote right up in the mountains with Renuka, his daughter, ailing. This is 92. My sight shall be lost. Life will draw the curtain over my eyes. Yes, stars will watch and morning rise and hours heave like sea waves. When I think of this end, the barrier of moments breaks. I see the world with its careless treasures. Rare is its lowliest seat, rare its meanest life. The things I longed for and the things I got, let them pass. Let me possess the things I spurred. I see by the light of death. And it's interesting that Tagore says he sees by the light of death. Even then he is seeing, aware, and trying to open up things for us, even in this great mystery. But some of you may be wondering how this project started. And the truth is, it started completely, absolutely all of a sudden. My husband and I were in this Himalayan resort called Bir. It is a paragliding capital of India. Very beautiful place. And we had gone to a cafe called Avaz Cafe for coffee. And they were taking very, very long about the coffee. So like most mountain cafes, have a little bookshop there, a bookshelf there. And my husband, Suresh, picks up a copy of the Gitanjali and starts reading it. And when he starts reading it, I start peering over his shoulder and I'm reading it. Then I pull the book a little closer and I'm reading it. And then I'm almost having it in front of me and I'm reading it. And that's the way it was a magical experience. It was when I was reading it, it seemed like certain words were flying out like swans into my eyes. They were just lifting off. And it was this wonderful excitement, this rapture of reading this book. So when we left, we asked the owner, please, can we take this book with us? We want to photocopy it and we'll give it back. And he very sweetly said yes, though we were strangers. Very nice of him. So we took the book and bought another little children's notebook. And I started writing down the words from every prose poem of Tagore's that came to me, every prose poem, the certain words that stood out, I put down. And this is the way I worked on all the 103 poems of the Gitanjali. Every poem I went through with the words rising up and me putting it down. And then after I did this, I reread Tagore's Gitanjali and I said, hello, you know what? There are more poems here. There are remainder poems. So I made second remainder poems, as I call them, out of the other words that were in Tagore. And here I would just like to emphasize that already I decided I would not use any words of my own. I would not substitute any words. I would not interpolate any words. And I would not change his word order. These are the very strict parameters I gave myself when working here, because as you know, sometimes these parameters that you give yourself, this cage which you put in yourself, around yourself in creative work actually gives you more freedom. This was one thing I did, but I did change one thing. He uses thou and thee, which was the fashion in those times. I made that into you all the time. And I did this, why? Because one, to show the intimacy, and also as in all the bhakti and wisdom traditions, the divine is addressed very intimately. Now, if I was writing this in Hindi, I would have probably used tu as the intermediary, the intimate, close you. But in English, we just have thou and you was my preference, you, my friend. And I also did not capitalize it because this is a friend. This is intimate. This is glorious, but close. Now, I must though confess that I was not a fan of Tagore. I think all of us have read Tagore when we were in school, as Professor Mendi had pointed out. And I too had read when the, not just 35, but a few others. And I remember thinking, oh my God, nice stuff, but fusty, wordy. And I left it at that. And then the Tagore that came to me was always through movies, largely Ray, but also other movie adaptations. So this sudden coming in and taking on Tagore, taking on his work, was a total surprise. And I worked on it. And some 40 poems down, I sent it to a fellow poet to ask him his opinion. And his letter, his mail to me began with, "Congratulations, Priya, for taking on Gurudev's Nobel Prize winning poem, Gitanjali." And that's when, I promise you, that's when it struck me. I mean, the monumentality of, as it were, taking it on. But I didn't see it as a taking it on. I saw it as something rapturous I was doing. I'm sure if I had thought about the risk of failure or the risk of offending anyone, I might have self-censored myself. But luckily, when I'm working, all that seems to cut away. I'm just with the work. So I continued working on this. And this is for the Bengalis in the audience. So far, luckily, I have not got any criticism of the work. They have been most receptive to it. Also because I think, a classic is a classic for a very good reason. It has so much to tell us. But it is precisely because it has so much to tell us that we need to go back to it and reinterpret or revision it in every generation. And for me, this revisioning is very much a tribute. It's not an erasure. It's not a cutting down. It is very much a tribute. And I hope this idea of tribute comes through in the work we shall read. And I began Gitanjali before the pandemic began. But through the first year of the pandemic, I was working on the Gitanjali. And for most of the second year, we were going up and down with my publisher, that is Context Books Westland, with this most fabulous editor, CEO, V.K. Karthika. And we were working on this together. And I found that as I was working on the Gitanjali, as the external world kind of closed in and made it small, it made my world smaller and smaller, this internal world of landscapes of the mind, landscapes of the heart, the natural landscapes which one remembers, that just opened out. So there is this contrary, marvelous contrary direction which was happening. And I think this is what quite a few readers have picked up on, when they write back and say, thank you, or the most important, the most touching, shall I say, phrases for me was, it has given us solace. That, which means your work has actually gone and touched, it has affected another person. And I can't think of anything which gives a writer more, makes a writer feel more grateful for writing a particular work. We know, because we know that healing is connected with grief, and we are dealing with grief during the pandemic, but we're also trying to deal with courage. And we're also dealing with another kind of grief, a kind of a grief where because it's also a time of political uncertainties. when there is a fear of not just us falling apart, but also the nation falling apart, there is this fear. So one fear plays on another and it is layered. But you have Tagore's marvelous moral reasoning taking you through all this. So a small point I will add before we go, I should start showing you the poems, is that I didn't use any punctuations in my work. I threw out every full stop, every comma, every semicolon, everything. And I wondered why I did this. It was an intuitive decision. And then I thought, yes, of course, it is because of my whole love to give freedom to the reader. The moment we put a full stop or a comma, we're telling the reader where to pause. Read it this way. I want you to, this is a paragraph, take a breath, new idea coming through, this is the next. When you remove that, you allow the reader so much entry into your work to make it their own. And this has been very important all through my writing life, whether I'm doing nonfiction or fiction translation, making the poem, letting the reader take the poem and make it their own, because each poem lives in the present. I think it is reborn in each reader, it is reborn in each reading, and it is avatared each time in the reader's mind. Because poetry, you know, they say, I don't understand it. But it's not just about understanding how we understand a bird call like that. I think it is something as seminal. You understand, you don't have to understand every word to get the movement of thought, the movement of feeling in the poem. Because for me, poetry is not communication. It is communion, 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 communion with yourself, communion with the reader, communion with the sacredness of the word, the sacredness of life, the sacredness of nature. So that is kind of what led me to writing and the reasons behind this book. But now I would ask Nikhil, please, can we have visual 35? And I'll ask Sita, if you could read that, okay? And then I will read my revisioning of it. When you see it on the page, you will see how Tagore's, yeah, here it is, Tagore's prose poem, and then you'll see mine. Sita, please.
Can I just say one word, Priya, before I start reading? Because sort of what Priya neglected to say is how brilliant and beautiful her revisioning is. So I just wanted to make a small point on, I think I have it, that while Tagore's 103 prose poems are considered prose poems, you speak of them as songs. Am I right?
Yes.
And so that is kind of an interesting way to think about form and all that you were talking about. And also I hope this comes up in questions and answers at a time, your use of the word revisioning, because there are two verbs, no, in revisioning.
Yes.
It gets back, it revises, but it also
revisions. Very true.
Yeah. And the Bengali, I mean, the thee and the thou, I'm so glad you got rid of them because I too did not like it. No, but the point is, I have also heard that the Bengali version, the Bangla version, they use the more intimate form of you, right? So
right.
Yeah, there's a coming back to that as well, relooking.
Yes. And I've also heard that the Bengali version, his version is far more sonorous, it's far more musical than these English translations, which he has done. But for me, the English was enough to, you know, chadao me, as they say, and get me going. So, but thank you so much for your points. Yes, these are songs, these are stutters of the sacred. And this is his Tagore's number 35, which we all learn in school. Let's start from a poem we all begin, we know.
Yes. Number 35. from Tagore's Gitanjali, 1912. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action. Into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake.
Thank you, Sita. Yeah, we're scrolling down now to my version. As I said, there are two, I have two songs, two poems in it. And the first poem is just this: into freedom, let my country awake. That I thought was the most significant telling part of it, the heart of it. And the rest of it is the build-up, which I used, or not the build-up, but the explorations, the many ways of exploring. How does this freedom, how does my country awaken to freedom? And let's just, for 1 minute before I read this poem, let me just make this point before I forget, because for Tagore, of course, the future nation evolved from the inner being of personal morality, you know, the inherent divinity in oneself. So it is from each one that it goes out. And I'll read the poem now, the other part of it, from Sing of Life, my version. Into freedom, let my country awake. May the mind be without fear, knowledge free, world not broken, words come from truth, reason not lose its way, mind be led to ever widening thought and action. And this beautiful, I mean, crucial as it was and relevant as it was when it was written, I think it's as relevant today, because Tagore is doing something unusual here. He is putting together reason and faith, intermingling it, putting in, one doesn't cancel out the other, but heighten the other. And this, I think, is unique in many, it's a unique kind of vision. And it also means you're open to debate, which I think we are sadly losing nowadays. But unless we have this openness to debate, and unless we put reason and faith, whatever that faith may be, together and not divorce it, I don't see how we can be, you know, fully functional humans, shall I say. This is my view. And, you know, let's go then on to visual 58, which is yeah. Sita, could you take that, please?
I love this one. Number 58. Let all the strains of joy mingle in my last song, the joy that makes the earth flow over in the riotous excess of the grass, the joy that sets the twin brothers, life and death, dancing over the wide world, the joy that sweeps in with the tempest, shaking and waking all life with laughter, the joy that sits still with its tears on the open red lotus of pain, and the joy that throws everything it has upon the dust and knows not a word.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite poems too. And here again, I think it is a poem of overcoming grief and gratitude to life. I mean, you have the pain and you have the joy, the one struggle and the other taking it on. And I would like to, Nikhil, just, yes, please. This is the first of my Sing of Life, the first poem. And you'll see what I've been doing is always kind of condensing it it's a kind of an excavation of the Gitanjali I'm doing, a condensing and intensifying of it. I just seem to, you throw out the embroidery, and I hope that generations after, they'll do something with the Gitanjali or my work and throw out something more as well. I mean, that's how classics also live, right? Constant reinterpretation. Sing of Life, 58. Let all joy mingle, joy that makes the earth flow in grass, sets life and death dancing, that throws everything it has on the dust, that knows not a word. Second poem. In my last song, joy still sits still on the open red lotus of pain. I mean, what an image that is, the idea of joy sitting on the open red lotus of pain, the red giving you the idea of blood, and joy almost like a dewdrop there, very present in this poem. And you might wonder why maybe I have split the words like this and, have it as if it were floating or dancing around the page. And this is, for me, there has to be a tentativeness in the translations you're doing. And this work of the Gitanjali is, in a sense, a translation, what we might call a fungal translation. It certainly is a palimpsest because Tagore wrote it in Bengali, then he wrote it in English, and I've written over it. And it is also a collage because of the way the words are put together. But this floatingness is also because I wanted silence on the page. Like when you see an ikebana arrangement, and as they say, it is not just the flower, the twig, the stem, the earth, the container, but also the spaces around it which make the composition. I think a poem is very much like that. It is the spaces around it that also make the composition. And for me, this swinging also, it adds not only for me to the tremulousness, but to, or the ephemerality, but also to, for me, a sense of sacredness, because it doesn't seem fixed. And for me, the sense of the sacred is not fixed. It is ever moving and ever present. But so after that, I think we will move to 65, which Sita might have, would read earlier, maybe.
Number 65. What divine drink wouldst thou have, my God, from this overflowing cup of my life? My poet, is it thy delight to see thy creation through my eyes and to stand at the portals of my ears, silently to listen to thine own eternal harmony? Thy world is weaving words in my mind, and thy joy is adding music to them. Thou givest thyself to me in love, and then feelest thine own entire sweetness in me.
Thank you. And thank you, Nicola. I'll have mine. The other thing, the one thing you would have noticed I'm doing is I have brought all the songs into the present. And that is because for me, the Gitanjali is a living poem. It has things to say to us. So it has to be, for me, in the present tense. 65, Sing of Life. Listen to eternal harmony. The world weaves words in my mind. Joy adds music to this overflowing cup of my life. Love, feel your sweetness in me. Yeah. And here again, it is, of course, this, I think there is a sense of nature, but I would now like to talk about a poetry we practice a lot today, which is loosely called eco-poetics, which was earlier called nature poetry. And we know in every tradition, world tradition, there have been poems on nature. And when we say eco-poetry, what we are actually saying is, it is poetry written, it's a kind of a protest poetry where the Anthropocene, man, has started wrecking the earth. And these are poems against that scenario, taking the consequences of it. And for me, insisting on its sacredness. It's also, I think quite a few people are now more and more agreeing with the idea of hylozoism, which is that everything has life. It's a kind of pan-animism. Everything has life. It is not just that you see the trees. It could be that the trees are also sensing you. This kind of mutuality, reciprocity, which is happening, which I think is important for us to understand as every day we go on ruining the earth, destroying the earth a little more, forgetting that it's our only home, you know. And I think Tagore knew this instinctively. I mean, he instinctively knew, and he'd also, of course, read up too. He felt it instinctively, but he's also read up about Ritu, the cosmic cycles of nature, whether it is in an atom or whether it is a galaxy, and the harmonies, the inherent harmonies that are there. And also, I'm sorry, that is Rita. Rita is the cosmic cycle. Ritu is, of course, the more familiar cycle of seasons, the repetitive cycle of seasons that we come across. And all this, I think, is important to keep in mind when we are really destroying the living earth, the sentient planet. And the sense of transcendental divinity, which some of us have, I think kind of can get into this love for the life around us, of which we are a part. But perhaps before I read another poem, you know, I remember Ismatji asking me if who are the poets I like, and how I got into this. I'll twist that question around just slightly, and I'll answer it in this way. I mean, I think the journey, my journey has been, when I first began writing poetry, it was very much narcissistic in the sense of looking into the mirror and trying to make sense of what is happening to you. And slowly, when I kept looking not into the mirror, but into the lake to see your own reflection, slowly you see the reflections of other things. The bus going by, the plane flying ahead, the shadow of a tree, all that, the birds flying past. You become aware of all these other reflections in the same pool of water that you're looking at. And I think that is a stage you explore. And then I think that for me, there was a third stage, which is when you're trying to look through the water to see what lies underneath. Is it a little treasure box? Are there shells? Is it an old shoe lying there? What lies inside? And perhaps an extension of that is, what is this water? What is this life exactly, which you're trying to reach through words, which you're trying to unfathom for yourself, you know? So, and hopefully touch the reader and share with the reader through time. So now I will go to one other poem, which is, yes, 10. This poem is also very dear to me because it talks about the place of art. And as as you know, Tagore spoke about art sensitizing a person, and also that it is the call of the soul to the real, by which he meant an idea of the creator, whoever it may be, or creation, or her. But this was, and as I think it was Dr. Radhakrishnan, the president then, who said, the Gitanjali is a call from of the finite to the infinite, is how he put it. So there is always this idea of what art does, writing, singing, music, anything creative does to the human being. And this is one of the songs. He's got many songs like this, but this is one of the songs. So maybe Sita, may I ask you?
Sure. 101. Ever in my life have I sought thee with my songs. It was they who led me from door to door, and with them have I felt about me, searching and touching my world. It was my songs that taught me all the lessons I ever learned. They showed me secret paths. They brought before my sight many a star on the horizon of my heart. They guided me all the day long to the mysteries of the country of pleasure and pain. And at last, to what palace gate have they brought me in the evening at the end of my journey?
Yeah. So, thank you. Thanks, Sita. 101. I have sought you with my songs. With them I have searched and touched my world. They showed me secret paths, stars on the horizon of my heart. To what gate have they brought me at the end? 2. With my songs, I feel about, searching, touching, guide me to the mysteries. And I think there is a tentativeness in art, which a vulnerability which he speaks about, which I find amazing, which is here when, and the thing is, when you chop and cut, when you condense these poems, sometimes new meanings seem to leap out. But let me read to you just a couple of poems. One of them is 59 from my version, which is here, which I think is again very much to go. 59. There is nothing but love, this light, these clouds, this breeze on my forehead. Light floods my eyes, bends from above, looks down on my eyes. This is your message. 57. When I spoke of eco-poetics and the centrality of nature in Tagore, here it is. World-filling light, eye-kissing light, heart-sweetening light. Light dances, light strikes, the sky opens, wind runs wild, laughter passes over the earth, butterflies spread sails on the sea of light, jasmines and lilies surge on waves of light, light shatters gold on clouds and scatters gems. Heaven's river has drowned its banks. My darling at the center. And the last poem I will end with is a poem, again, very central to me, which speaks of the concept of samadarshan, equity of the gaze of love on everything. 69. The same stream of life that runs through my veins runs through the world. The same life that shoots through blades in grass and breaks into leaves and flowers, the same life is rocked in the ocean cradle of birth and death. My limbs are made glorious by its touch. My pride is the life throb dancing. The same life, the same life, the same life in my blood. Thank you so much. Thank you. And this is my book.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Priya. That was really wonderful. You know, we have had a program, we have had several programs on to go in the Poetry Society. In fact, one we did was his poems put to music. And
lovely.
we sang them. You know, it makes such a difference when you hear a scholar like you, bringing it all to life. And I think the beauty of Tagore is the joy, you know, as against Mahatma Gandhi, who's the two philosophies at that time. His was pain and sorrow, and with the Tagore, how, like you read that one about the red lotus and the dewdrop. So, you know, how he brings out the joy in life, even in death, even in pain, there's joy. And I think that is what is fascinating about Tagore. And like you said, for the pandemic, I think the Gitanjali and Tagore is really what we need. And the way you brought it all out, his poem and the way you put it together, I mean, was really beautiful.
Thank you so much.
The depth with which you have understood Tagore is really wonderful.
Thank you. I really feel humbled by this, really, truly. And you know that point you made about the joy in Tagore, it's so true, because even about detachment, he says he's not for renouncement, but he says the way I can be away from pain is by detaching, not from renouncing sensual pleasures. So there again, you see the shift. We were talking about Gandhi and Tagore as these two giants. And you see again the different stances they take. But thank you. I very much appreciate what you say. Thank you so much.
Anybody has any questions that you would like to ask Priya? And thank you, Sita. You read so beautifully. You have such a lovely musical voice. It was almost like you were singing the poems.
I'm a big fan of Priya's work.
We're mutual, Sita. Yeah.
Anybody has any questions?
Yes, I have. Ma'am?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Are you able to listen?
We can hear you, Mr. Kota. Yes, please read. Please ask.
Ma'am Chabria, it was wonderful that I could see that the essence of Tagore's poetry has been brought out by you through those words picked out from each of these poems which you have read out, and showed us that Tagore's poetry is actually something which we should yearn for.
Yes.
One. Two, second question. Yes, second question. What are the origins of Rabindra Sangeet? Are they from Gitanjali or somewhere else of Tagore's works?
You see, the thing is that as we know, Rabindra, from what I know, as I said, I'm not a Tagore scholar, nor am I a Bengali, but Rabindra Sangeet is also this very syncretic form he put up. But it isn't necessarily only drawn from the Gitanjali. There are a whole lot of songs that are sung in which the Rabindra Sangeet contains. The Gitanjali has its own, shall we say, place in this vast creative output that Tagore put up. And I mean, even when you're talking of Rabindra Sangeet, it reminds me also what he did with Shantiniketan, again so syncretic, at a time when there used to be the English schools and, as it were, the schools for native tongues. And he brought them together in the Shantiniketan, where both English and Bangla were taught, and under trees, as in, out in the open with nature, so that the kids could have a totally different appreciation and a sense of a different kind of space coming into them, even as they took in the words, the knowledge that the teachers gave them. So,
just one more question, please. Is Tagore's poetry naturally romantic, or has it been romanticized by him?
I'm not quite sure actually what you mean by that. Is his naturally? I would say he is a poet of great lyrical sensitivity, and if by that, and that pours out of him, and his metaphors, the way he sees things and puts things together is really what shall I say? It's like a song. So in that sense, I would say that's remarkable, but I would also, I mean, with romantic, if you put it with a capital R, you're speaking of a certain kind of literature, right? Or if it's a small r, it's a certain kind of romance. Of course, we know that Tagore did venture into that with Ghare Baire and even Charulata and other novels. But basically, I think from what my understanding is, it is all the work has great lyrical power and great insight into the human condition, Sorry. So, thank you.
Priya, just one question. He came from such a traditional, conservative kind of background and surroundings. Where do you think his secularism came from?
Well, I think from various places. I mean, also let's remember that the Tagore family, the women of the Tagore family, for one, started experimenting with saris, with garments. And the way we wear our modern saris is thanks to the Tagore women who decided this is the way they'll wear it, over the shoulder with blouses with lovely lace ruffles. So this was a syncretic, happening right in the family with garments. And Brahmo Samaj also, let's remember, of which, his family was strongly Brahmo Samaj. And there is God the Father, like the Abrahamic religions. So they were pulling in a lot of things, always. And I think he came in from this society. He read deeply, read voraciously. And I think, here's a person who doesn't want to be tied in by anything, cramped in, because that is not the role, that is not how you can grow, is it? So you pull in from everywhere. That's what the civilization, our subcontinent, has been doing for so many centuries, millennia, right? So, wouldn't you agree? I mean, in South Indian weddings, which I am familiar with, you use rose water, right? And where does this come from? This comes from the Mughal court. In everyday matters, we share, we change, we transfer, we absorb. So much is given, so much is taken. I mean, it's such a richly diverse place, isn't it? Our country.
Anybody, any more questions?
Just 3 words are there: freedom from fear.
Yes.
How far are we away from that goal today?
First of all, I'm a poet, not a politician. So, and I think that's the kind of question each one of us has to ask themselves. How far are we? What are we prepared to do? Where are we?
Tagore is appealing.
Yes, I would certainly agree with you on that. So,
I heard you in wonderment. Really, it was
Thank you
so
so much.
beautiful. It was so absorbing. Didn't want you to stop actually. And the
Thank you so much.
continuity of flow, the continuity of ideas, it was a very amazing experience.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, but your poem on light reminded me of a poem in Arabic by
Please.
Mikhail Neumann.
Ah.
But he wrote it in Arabic and light, let there be light. I don't remember the whole of it, but if you, maybe I'll send it to you later. The whole, something
Please.
similar. And it's written at the same time, you know. They were
I would love to have it, Ismaji. I would love to read it.
I think they were contemporaries. So that's something I wanted to tell you. So thank you very much for an amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Thank you, madam.
Mithi, can we have Mithi? Are you there? Mithi? Nikhil, is Mithi with us?
Yeah, she's here. I'm just going to ask her to unmute. Mithi, can you unmute?
Thank you, Ms. Chabria, for the wonderful meeting that we've had today with you.
Thank you.
It was really a pleasure listening to you and listening to an opinion on the Gitanjali that we never could have thought before. And I think coming from a non-Bengali makes all the difference. I also take this opportunity to thank Nikhil Nayak for arranging this Zoom meeting. And I thank the president of the society for arranging the meeting and for all our guests and members here who are present today and who have jointly enjoyed it with me. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. Thank you very much. And we hope we're going to have more of you. Ismat read out that you also have done a study on Sangam poetry.
Yes.
So maybe if you have the time sometime, one on Sangam poetry too.
Yes, definitely.
The oldest literature of India.
Yes. Yes, indeed. It'll be my pleasure.
Look forward to that.
Thank you. I'm sorry I haven't answered your question, Sita, about hylozoism in nature poetry. And basically, hylozoism is a very old concept, which I think all, in one way or the other, all the indigenous people believed in, about life, about everything being animate, and even the planet being sentient, which I think more and more of us are beginning to. Hello, is that a volcano? That's the planet speaking, you know, to understand the ways of expression that are not human. That is part of it. And of course, we know now trees communicate so well and they nurture their young. So these are growing wonderful fields of knowledge and experience.
When you said that mix of faith and reason, right? Which
yes, exactly.
Bringing us these new ideas or new evidence.
Evidence is the right word. Yes, absolutely.
Which is
strong scientific.
Which is different from divinity, right? I mean, pantheism, like
yes.
Everything divine is different from everything.
Yes, I mean, this is, yes, you're right. This is hard scientific research done on plants, on roots, on, as you know, you'd be much more the expert on that than me, Sita. But there is science and there is a listening to the earlier voices of faith, one on top of the other. I think that's what happens. So thank you very much for this very enjoyable session. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Thank you once again, Sita, for popping the idea. And thank you, Ismaji, for calling me. And Nikhil, you've been absolutely marvelous. Thank you, Arunarji. I hope to see all of you in person too one day.
Thank you.
In the near future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you and bye.
Bye-bye.
Good
Please
night.
send me that. Bye.
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 Good night, everyone. Goodbye.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you, Aruna.
Most welcome.